so I'm just going to start recording now. I think Nick was supposed to join, but I haven't heard from him. So I think we can just go ahead and start, and we can give the video to him after. And I asked Yunkai this already, but Celia, do you need to learn like the full like process from like say Depopy as well on top of also hand classifying? Because I was planning on just going through that. Feel free to just chat it.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you were planning to do, go ahead.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and just, let me just show you the paper first that I sent, because it kind of goes through what I'll be looking at today. Let me just show you this briefly. So it's the Graffanti paper. I recommend reading through this one fully. It gives a lot of good tips on running your hand classification of the ICA data. But some of the things we're going to be looking for are going to be looking at the spatial characteristics and then also the temporal and power spectrum. So some of the things that we'll look for in noise versus signal is if there's a lot of little tiny clusters in the data, and I'll show you what this all looks like, but this is just a table to kind of brief you guys before we go into it. So if there's a lot of small clusters in the data, that's bad, versus like a nice clean large cluster. And then also if you have a lot of gray or white matter and CSF signal overlap, that's also potentially noise. And then again, overlap with white matter, CSF, and blood vessels. If you see any ring-like or crescent shapes or stripes around the brain, that's also usually a signal of noise. And then other banding patterns like slice directions or streaks, that might also be from head motions as well. So those are kind of the main noise characteristics we'll look for. And then I'll show you what this is, but there's also the temporal and spectral features. So in the time course of the data, you're going to want to look for any large jumps or sudden changes in the oscillation. So if it's kind of like very jagged. And then also other noise features, or if they're mainly in the high frequency area, that's also a signification or a signal that it might be noise data. And just a brief view on this down here. So for example, this is the time series right here, and this is the power spectra. So these are going to be the two things you're going to want to look at along with the actual components. And what you can see with the time spectra, you're looking for any sudden big jumps, so that could be motion. And then the power spectra, so what this is, the bottom 0.0, 0.1, 0.2, these are the different frequencies of the data. And then this is the amount of power of the data. So it pretty much just takes the full scan length and breaks it down by these different power spectra. So what we're going to want to look for is, for good data, is within the 0.0, 0.1 frequency range. So that's good. But if you see any large spikes in these high frequency areas like 0.4, 0.5, that might be some of the noise. So this paper just goes through a lot of this stuff. But we'll go through this in an example that I have. Okay, and then another thing I wanted to show you guys before we get started is just this on here, just what you're going to want to have set up before you get started with your data. So depending on what you're doing, so if you're doing single subject, you may not need to make this full Excel sheet. But if you're doing like a group ICA, this type of Excel is really handy, especially if you're doing the group ICA from the GIFT toolbox, which is for like dynamic processes. What you're going to want is the volume number, and then, let's do it. So like the volume number, and then you also have the time course number, and we'll go through that. And then you want to have a list so that way you could classify it as signal and noise. And it helps if you do the group ICA to actually label what network it is, and then what brain area, and then any notes that you have, because sometimes the data can actually be a mix of signal and noise, and sometimes it's a little bit tricky to identify whether it's signal or noise. And in that case, you can always ask Jason and I if you have any questions on any of the mix types that you have. So this is just an example of one of the Excel sheets that you might want to set up before running, especially group ICA data. For single subject, if you have multiple runs, this might be a little bit tough to do. And then, so let me just go through this. So what I was describing, some of the artifacts like ringing around the brain. So this is one example. So these are just different types of artifacts to look for. So I just have like an Excel here, or a sheet, a Google Doc, that I can look at examples of good signals. These are all like good signals. This is all good signal. And then some of the networks, if you need to actually label the networks. And then this is from the Graffanti paper. And then I thought this was helpful, so that way I can actually see some examples of artifacts. So another artifact would be also if it's in the brainstem. So brainstem, white matter, CSF, ventricles, ringing around the brain, or any weird big clusters that are in white matter, for example. Another one is also the also in areas where you might have like frequency dropout, like in the sinus areas, or sometimes the eyes, or if the signal is outside the brain as well, you're going to want to look for that. Do you guys have any questions about any of the artifacts versus signal at all? Does that make sense for you guys? I can't see the chat.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I was just asking if you can share the Google Doc with us, because it seems really helpful, especially like when we have to name the networks and like all this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, if it's, I wasn't sure if it'd be useful for you, for you guys, but
So much.
Yokai, what's your Gmail?
Just YX day.
Oops. Why?
YX day like Zoom.
This one?
No, they like Zoom. No, 1585. Yes.
At Gmail.
Miami Daddy.
Oh, okay.
Gmail.
Awesome. Yeah, and then if anyone else needs this,
Yeah, that one.
I can send this over to anyone else who might need it. But yeah, so these are just some ideas, or it kind of helps to have this on the side when you're looking at the data. So that way it helps, especially when you're first new at classifying the noise versus signal, just so you have an idea. And especially if you have to get all the, if you have to label the different networks, sometimes for the dynamic methods, you have to label the networks, and that could be a little bit tricky. So it's good to have some examples ready for you. Okay. Yeah, so let's go ahead and move over to the actual steps to running it. And then I'll show you guys an example of classifying it as well. Okay, I'm just gonna share my, my like Dex to go screen, so 1 second. Okay, so if you first need to run ICA Roma, so you didn't run it like melodic or anything through dpoppy or FSL, there's a script to actually do it, but it's pretty much the same thing if you run it through like dpoppy or FSL. So I'll just show you. So this is the script to actually run it. And what you want to do is you're going to want to go to your preprocessed data. And so this just has the directory to your data, and then the Roma folder, which is at least in our lab, it's in the toolbox. So you don't change this one. And then the brain mask, you don't change this unless you want to use like a different size brain mask for your data. And then you're also going to want to direct the folder to the motion folder, and that's the realign parameter folder from dpoppy if you ran from there. And then for us, we usually organize our data using like this format. So I'll just show you what that looks like here. So this is where the folder directory is going to for me. It's going to this fun image ARWS from Depopy. And then my folders are formatted like this for all the subjects. So, and then in here, this is where the output's gonna go. And for me, the output went to here, the denoise_new. And then here is where you actually run the ICA aroma. So it's gonna need your input file. So for me, it's like this task run.nii. And then the output file, denoise_new was for me, which is this folder. And then you're gonna need the motion folder and this specific file. I'll just show you what that one was for me. So it has all the different motion on here for the subject. And then you just want to make sure it's all named the same. So mine was rp.txt. Okay. Okay, and then you'll want the also put the brain mass directory and then whatever your scan tr right here. And then all you do is just save this and then you just run it in the terminal. And that's how you can run ICA aroma independent from Depopy or FSL. Okay, and then what you're going to want to do is look at your output file. So mine was in the denoise_new. And then in here, I'm going to look in the melodic.ica folder. And then this is the part where you can actually like classify the data. So you're always going to want to pull up this melodic_ic.nii.gz file in FSL. So I'll go ahead and show you what that's going to look like. Are you guys familiar with this, or is this boring for you, or is this helpful?
Helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. I'm glad it's helpful. I wasn't sure if you guys knew.
It's helpful to me, but it's my first. I don't have too much experience on FSL actually.
Okay, this is actually from. This is after I ran pre-processing and Depopy. So that's just so it can be either.
Okay.
If you need a run through of FSL, I think Jason has some videos that he runs through like a GLM. And there's also Andy's Brain blog, which goes through a lot of video tutorials on how to use FSL, which I recommend. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so what you're gonna do, so you open up the FSL eyes, and I have it formatted so that way I'll be able to put the power spectra and the time series here. I think how you get all that is like the settings, power spectra, and then you select those, and then time series, then you select those as well. Or maybe just click this, it's time series and power spectra in view. But I'll go ahead and add the file. Okay, so you need that melodic_ic.nii.gz file. And then you're going to need a brain mass to go under it. So I just have mine here. And I can send, you can just pull it from my folder, or Jason has one too. So you can just copy it if you don't have one already. And then you always want to make sure your melodic IC folder is on top. So I move that up. And then you're going to want to put it to from 2 to 5 to start. And then just choose a color to look at them. And then you have your actual components here is what you see. Yeah, so then that's how you can pull up your data, and then you start to go through your components to see if there's signal or noise. And then one thing, if you run that ICA aroma, it does try to classify the data for you. So then what I like to do is open up, let me see this classification overview. No, let me look up classify motion ICs. So these are the ones that they classified as noise. what I like to do is usually copy this, and then I create a new folder in here, just empty file, and you can name it, you want to name it the same thing as the others, and then you just name it whatever. And then I like to paste it in there so that way I can just have like at least a template to begin to look at the data. Just because sometimes they're wrong, but it's just kind of nice to see what they did, and then that way if I have the same classification as them, I don't have to like retype it. So that's just through Aroma that you can do this. And then on here, what you want to do is just go one by one and look at the power spectra and then the time series to see if the data is signal or noise. And then, so this one, for example, it looks like a good power spectra. It's within the 0.0 or 0 to 0.1 range. And this is okay. It's not like super jagged. But what you want to do is look in the actual components. And then you can zoom in on the areas of the peaks of signal, because that would be what's going to tell you the most information. And what I like to do is have this atlas open and then choose a few things in here. So I usually have like the Harvard one. And then if you need to know the cerebellar regions, I click that as well. So I like to have that atlas. And then on here, I can look down and see the actual regions that the component's on. So here, this is just like the cerebellar. So it doesn't tell us any information about white matter or gray matter. So usually Jason has us keep the cerebellum data, so we don't classify that as noise. But again, if it's in the brainstem, then we will classify that as noise. And then one thing that's a little bit tricky is that here the volume will always be one behind the component. So you see it's 0, and then here melodic says that's 1. It counts as 1. So that's just one thing that's a little bit tricky. And then, so yeah, I'll just show you a couple of these, and then I have one that we can actually go through entirely, and I'll show you how I classified it. Yeah, so then this one again, it looks like cerebellum, so probably just keep it. I just put this back down. And then you can see a little bit, if it gets like at the eyeball area, that could potentially be noise. And then same if the data is kind of starting to ring around the brain like this, that's usually noise. So that's something you want to look out for. So for this one, I would probably classify it as noise. And also there's some brainstem here, which is also noise. But you can see it gets a little tricky because sometimes the power spectrum looks good and then the time series also looks good. So you have to also look at what's going on in the brain to be able to discern if it's signal or noise. And then sometimes there's cases where it could be mixed. So with the cerebellum, it's maybe not as much as like a priority than if you had like the default mode network and some noise. Then in that case, you probably preserve the data and actually count it as signal. So what Jason usually and Lucina tells me to do is usually go on the safe side. So we never want to take out data that is potentially signal, even though it has some noise. But if it's for sure noise, then we'll take that out. But if it has some signal, then we want to err on the safe side and go ahead and keep that in. Okay, so for this one, I would probably classify this as noise just because it has a lot of the ringing and also the brainstem. And remember, this one is component 2, so then you would put 2 here. So that they already had that as classified as noise. And then let's just look at a couple more. Okay, so this one, and again, you want to look at if it's more white matter or the cerebral cortex. And then, I like to just click around at the different regions. So far it's been cerebral cortex. And this is a good example of like nice groupings and not like a bunch of little splattered areas. So I would most likely think this is going to be signal. But again, sometimes it's tricky if it's white matter, and that's happened to me. But so far this is all cerebral cortex. So that's telling me that it's probably good signal. And then look at this, you can kind of see the network shaping right here. And then this is a pretty good time series. You would kind of expect this, the like sine waves a little bit, and then the power spectrum is good. So I wouldn't classify this as noise. And then for melodic, the aroma also didn't classify it. Okay. Yeah, so then this one, it's looking pretty good also. Again, just checking here. A little bit of white matter, so I might like zoom in on this one just to double check the brain region. Got a little bit more. Okay, still cortex. And then cortex, yeah, so I'd probably say this one is signal. It also looks a bit like the central executive network, which is cool. So I'd probably lean on keeping this one. And then the time series good. And then the power spectrum is also good. So let's see if they also didn't classify this. And remember that was number 4 component. Okay, and then here's another one. So you can see here the time series is very jagged. And then also there's peaks over in the higher frequency range. So that's already telling you that it's probably going to be noise, but we can double check. And then some white matter, it's kind of ringing. Yeah, there's not much going on in here, but it's kind of just wrapping around the brain. So that also kind of tells you that's going to be noise. So this one is number 5, and they already have it on there, so I don't have to write it down. Let's see some other examples. So yeah, so this one is one example of a clear noise. I don't even have to have time, like spend time to look at it. It's pretty obvious, and you can see this power spectrum is really bad, and the time series is a little bit jagged too. But they already classified that. And then this one, this is another example of a classic noise. It's kind of this big giant blob, and this this type of streak here is usually head motion that causes this. So I would count that as noise, which they already did. And then this one has ringing around the brain as well. And then the high power spectrum, so that would be also noise. And then brainstem, so that would be noise. For example, they didn't classify this one, so I would go ahead and put that in. And you can see it's all brainstem and everything, so we don't want that. And then this is another classic sign that usually comes up a lot, this giant wrapping around the brain. Usually we just put that as noise. Sometimes this one I notice can get mixed with signal. So you might want to just double check that. If it's not too bad of a wrap and pretty good signal, then I'll probably err on the safe side and keep it in as signal. But this one, there isn't really a clear signal in there, so I'll just put that as noise, which they already classified here. Now let's look a little bit more. White matter, cortex, pretty good cortex. Yeah, so this one looks pretty good. So I would keep this in as signal. This was the ICA component 11, and they didn't classify it, so that's good. So we don't want to put this in, because again, this is only these right here are only the noise components. So let's just look at a couple more examples. And this was all individual subject. What I noticed with the individuals, sometimes it can be a lot more trickier to classify than in the group one. The groups are usually very good, like it's very clear and obvious. And also in the groups, you're gonna usually have to put this down a little bit lower, just because it's a little bit different than the individual ones. So that's the group one is usually from if you do like the gift ICA, instead of doing melodic or the aroma ones. Okay, and then this one. Let's see. The time series is looking pretty bad, but we want to check these brain regions. Yeah, this one's a little bit tricky, but also pretty messy as well. So I'm more leaning towards the noise, and also this has a little bit of spikes there, but again, it does have like a good spike here, so it's a little bit trickier. I think for this one, I would probably put like a question mark on it, just because it is a little bit of both. But so in that case, like maybe leave it in. Let me see though, this is a little bit tricky. No, I think with this ringing here, it'd be enough to say that we can put it as noise. But you can see that, you know, it's a little bit tricky with if there's areas that that don't look like necessarily noise. So in that case, like you want to just be careful and put a question mark and double check that. But looking down here, there's some peaks over here and the time series isn't good. And that helps me decide, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put that as noise. And it looks like they also did that. So that makes me feel a little bit better that they classified it too. Okay. Yeah, so there's also some of the ringing around the brain. So I would go ahead and just put that as noise, even though the power spectrum doesn't show anything. And then this time series is a little bit rough, but nothing crazy. Yeah, the only thing is that it has pretty good signal in the cerebellum. So if you really care about the cerebellum, you might want to try to keep that in, just because if that's like a region of interest for you. But because the rest of it's a lot of ringing, I would probably go ahead and put that as noise. And they already put that there for us. Do you guys have any questions about this so far?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
There are big differences with the signals from cortical and subcortical.
So yeah, so with the subcortical, I think this might be a little bit of an example. So with the subcortical, you might see it's going to look usually bilateral. So you want to check that out. And then also, so it should look the same, like because you're going through the different slices. So if it's good signal, then it should still look like signal versus if it's noise, it's kind of splotchy. So there shouldn't be a difference. And you're going through the different slices in here. So if there is subcortical signal, then you should be able to see it okay. If that makes sense for you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
And
go for it.
Celia put something on the chat.
Oh, what is her question? Let me see if I can see the chat.
She said she can't unmute herself.
Oh, yeah.
She said does the volume number from the aroma classify the motion output match the volume number in FSL?
Yeah, so, okay, let me make sure I have this right. Does a volume number from aroma? Yeah, so this one is the, like the melodic ICA or like aroma here. And the volume number is always one, an FSL is one behind the melodic number here. So then whenever you put the noise components, you want to make sure it's +1 from the volume. And usually here it shows you that as well. So you want to go based off this number. It's a little bit tricky. So that's why I usually do, I like to have the Excel, because sometimes if I have a lot of different ones that I need to go through and a lot of questions, then I can have, I don't lose track as easily. But here you have to put the number down here, or one number up from the volume number. Yeah, so let's just go, we can finish going through a couple more of these. And then I'll show you just another one in a couple more examples. And I think that should be pretty good, because you guys have some idea of what to look for. And then also, you know, it just takes a lot of practice to just identify it. And if you have any questions, you can always screenshot it and send the picture to, or send me your pathway to Jason or I, and we can always look at your guys's data too. Okay, so this one, it looks like a little bit more white matter, so you want to like zoom in on it. And then try to get right in those peak areas of activation, and it looks like white matter. And then white matter. So number 14, I would probably put as noise, because we don't want the white matter. So that would put that one in there. And then usually want to just go back out to the same minimum maximum as you keep going along. And one thing I noticed that is when you're clicking here, sometimes it can get out of order when you press this. It's just like a glitch with FSL. So always double check when you're writing this stuff down, just because sometimes it can jump up, like I noticed like 3 volumes up from where I'm at, and then that can mess up your flow if you don't check these. So that's just one thing to look out for. So this one is a clear example of noise. So you can see it's just this, especially this line. That's usually motion, so I'd want to put that as noise, which I have there. And let's see this one. And also if it's ventricle, we don't want that either. So this one might have some ventricle. Let's keep looking. I'll probably like zoom in on this one to see what's going on. So it's still looking like cortex, white matter. And again, I always just like to just go through different slices to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, I think this one is okay. It ended up not being in the ventricles. And then this looks okay, and then these are mainly in the high area, the power spectrum. So I'll probably keep that as signal, which I have already. And then some other ones to look out for we haven't come across yet. So you also want to look out for the temporal pulse. I think it's like within these regions. Sometimes that can actually be, usually that's noise, but what you want to do if you have the temporal pulse showing up, you want to make the decision based off your time series in the power spectrum, because sometimes you'll get the temporal pulse and it'll be a good power spectrum. So in that case, go ahead and keep it, but sometimes those are tricky and you want to go ahead and if the power spectrum and time series aren't good, then you would want to classify that as noise. So that's just another one to look out for. Okay, so like this one looks pretty good. It's mainly within the cortex. So I'd probably keep 17 as noise. Oh, sorry, signal. Okay, and then sometimes you get like kind of big ones like this. And sometimes it's mainly in the cerebral cortex, so you just want to double check. So I'll just zoom in on the regions. Okay, cortex. Cortex. Yeah, so this one is looking, when I zoomed in, it was more on the cortex rather than white matter. Even though this isn't perfect, it does have some higher peaks in the power spectrum, and this isn't perfect, but just by looking at it and seeing that it's mainly in the cerebral cortex, I would probably go ahead and keep that as signal just to be safe, even if it is a little bit mixed with noise. So I would keep that one as signal. Okay, and then this one, that was like a clear, obvious noise. Again, like with the motion. So that one is already classified. This one is also motion. Here you can see that it's not classified, so I'd want to put that in there. And then 21, this one looks like also another streak or line here, and then also brainstem. And then you can just look here, the power spectrum is really bad, so it's for sure noise, so I put that there. And then this one would also be noise. You can see from the power spectrum time series and the line here, there. Then this one's looking pretty good. It's not as clear cut of a signal, but okay, this one looks like it's okay. And it's in the cortex, so I'll probably keep that as signal, which is good. They didn't classify it. This one is another one of those funky noise ones. Let's just look through the rest of these real quickly. This one doesn't really have a strong signal component in there. Let's see. And I've also had some where it was like completely blank. So you could try to go down a little bit just to see where it is. But if it's like completely blank, there's no component visually observable, then I would probably put that as noise just because it doesn't really add to anything. Okay, but in here I can kind of see what's going on. Let's see. This is pretty messy. Cortex. Yeah, this one's like definitely a little bit more of a tricky one just because it's not as clear cut as some of the other signals. So in that case, because the power spectrum is in like huge spikes over and in the high frequency regions, and the time course is pretty typical, I would probably err on the safe side and keep this one in, for example. So 25, I'll delete it from theirs. Okay, so this one looks like a more clear signal, but it's good to double check because sometimes it will look like signal, but it'd be a white matter, and then we don't want that. Okay, so looks good so far. Good. Okay, a little bit mixed, so I'll probably zoom in just to double check. Okay, cortex. Okay, so that one would definitely be signal, which is good. And one thing to also note is that depending on how long your data is, if you have a longer scan run, usually ICA will do a lot better job. But I think this one was only like a 6-minute run, so there aren't going to be many components to look at, and also usually ICA doesn't do as good of a job if you have shorter scan runs, so that's something also to consider. And then this one's one of those, another one that's bad. It's already on there. Okay. It's really cortex, and this looks fine. It's mainly in the higher or the lower power spectrum region, so that's good. So I'd keep this one in, number 28. And then let's see. White matter, some white matter. I'll zoom in on this. White matter, some cortex, but also mainly white matter. Cortex. As I zoom in, it looks a little bit more like the cortex rather than white matter, which is good. Okay. So this one is a little bit tricky, just because it doesn't look like necessarily perfect, but I think because the signal, the highest peaks were mainly in the cerebral cortex, this one's safe to go ahead and leave in. So I wouldn't classify this one as noise. Okay, and this one, it's like a pretty big spike over here. So I'm probably already thinking that this is gonna be potentially noise, but it does have some peaks over here. So we just wanna double check. So I might wanna zoom in on this one. Cortex. Matter. So this one's kind of mixed because it has a little bit of white matter and cortex, and it has some in the lower frequency region, but it does have a peak over here. The time series, nothing like too concerning. So with that, because it is mixed, again, you want to err on the safe side. So I would leave this one in for 29. Okay, this looks pretty fine. Okay, so yeah, so this one's another one that's pretty good, and it is a little bit mixed, but there's still the high power. If it is mixed and it is only in the these higher frequency regions, then I would for sure put it as noise. But again, when it's mixed with signal and noise, go on the safe side. So I would keep this one in. Okay, so I think this one's almost done. Cortex. Okay, so this one has like the temporal pole. So that's when you want to be careful. But I'll double check both sides. Yeah, so this one's a classic example of the temporal pole. So in this case, this looks a little bit jagged of a time series. And then you do have some in peaks in these the higher frequency regions. So with this one, I would probably want to put this as noise, just because, again, the temporal pole is a little bit of a tricky one, where you want to be careful with, because it's usually noise, but the rare cases is that it could be actual signal. But in this case, it's pretty, it's a little bit more have signs of being noise. So I'd go ahead and put that as noise. Okay, and then this one's another clear sign of noise. Okay, so that was just one example of classifying your data. And then I would just close this out and say save that. So that way it'll be set up for your next subject. So that was just one subject. And then what you want to do is just save this. And then after you run through all your subjects, you're going to want to run FSL reg fit is what it's called. And I have a script to run that. Unfortunately, the script, because you have to change out the files here, I tried to make it the script so that way it would like run through everyone. But for some reason, the FSL reg fit, it only allows like these hard code of the noise components here. So unfortunately, you have to do it per subject. So what you're going to do is just, again, change your directory to wherever your preprocessed data was. And then in here, you're going to use the regFilt command. And then from the directory, go to your subject. And then your preprocessed data, so not the melodic ICA, goes here. So just your preprocessed the NII file. And then you're going to go to the output, so where you want it to go. Usually I put it in a separate folder. And then you're going to want to get your melodic.ica file here. So that's going to, you just put this all together within that subjects file, of course. And then here is where you put the classification of the noise. So I'll just take all these noise components that I just classified, copy, and then put it here. And I can send you you guys these scripts also. And then all you do is save, and then you just run it in your in the terminal per each subject. And then where you're going to get is output the cleaned file. So I think in here I've decided I put it in the hand to noise folder. So let me go there. Let me get to this one. And then here is where you should get the output. So wherever you want the output is where you're going to get the cleaned up data. And it should just be, I think it's just like the name that you give the folder here is going to be the cleaned up data without those noise components. So yeah, so that's the full process if you use Aroma. It's a little bit different if you, I think if you did melodic. So let me just show you that one. Let's see, where is it? Okay, so I think Celia, this was our data. So let me just go back out. In-house data. Okay, so what Celia and I did, we ran the data in FSL, and then we have our task files. We have different tasks. And of course, if you have only resting state, then you'd only care about the resting state file. But in here, FSL, it did our pre-processing for us. And then in here, it has the filtered func data.ica. So it's pretty much that same melodic ICA folder that I showed you for if you run Aroma. And what's different about FSL, it runs melodic, which is the same thing. It's classifying, or it gets the components that it does the ICA for you, but it doesn't classify it into noise or signal components for you. So in this case, if you run just melodic, I don't know if dpoppy is the same as that, if it does melodic or Aroma, but it doesn't tell you what components they think that should be signal versus noise. So you have to do it by yourself. So Jason kind of calls it blind classification. And one thing that's kind of annoying for FSL, it doesn't give you the power spectrum here as it does with when you do IC Aroma independently, but you still have the time series. Another thing is they don't give you the number here. So you have to remember that the independent component number is one above the FSL volume number. So like this one's 43, so I'd want it to be, this component number would be 44. So yeah, so that's a little bit different, but the same steps apply. So I would go ahead and create a, I don't think I put in there. I would create a file, an empty file. and then you just name it whatever, HD, and then, but instead of copying over what was already classified, you have to put the noise components yourself. So I would put it like, you know, whatever ones are that I classify as noise just within this text file. Because we're gonna have to still run the FSL regfilt command afterwards for the subject. So that's the only difference if you use like melodic through FSL versus doing the Roma script that I showed you guys. Okay, and then let me just show you like this help page, which is kind of helpful. So this is just, if you look up like ICA or independent component analysis melodic. So this is like the FSL help page, which is kind of nice. And it's a good one to also just read through to understand what's going on. So just to kind of go backwards, you know, what they're doing in the independent component analysis is breaking it down into these time, spatial and time components, and then we're getting these spatial maps, and those are the actual components that we're getting from melodic. And then this is another like help page of like what is an independent component and how do I know what each one means. So it kind of runs through the process as well for you. So I think those are really helpful too. But yeah, so I can show you a couple more examples, or if you guys feel that was good, that's pretty much, that was just one example of running through it. And just to reiterate, you know, you want to look for the temporal poles, check the time series and power spectrum. Brainstem is for sure noise components, white matter, CSF, ventricles. If the signal overlaps those are for sure noise. And if cases where you have slightly both, if it's, you know, the power spectrum is okay, time series okay, but you have both a little bit of signal and noise, then you want to err on the safe side and only and go ahead and keep it as signal. And then yeah, and then the signal ones, they're mainly those like nice clusters that you're gonna see, and only in the brain matter and not the CSF regions either. Yeah, so hopefully that made sense. It wasn't too much for you guys.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Do you guys need those scripts at all? I can send those to you, or feel free, or I guess it's kind of hidden in my folder, so I'll have to send it to you guys. Okay, awesome. Well,
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Have you ever tried the ICA in DeepAbbey? Is there big differences with ICA Roma in DeepAbbey and or by the scripts?
Let me just let me do a quick Google to see which one they use. Because I do the pre-processing in DeepAbbey, but I don't click on the ICA component analysis, and then I run it like through Aroma, that script that I showed you. I run it through there after. So let me just see which one they use. Because what do you get as the output from the ICA Aroma?
Sorry?
Like, what's the output folder that you get? If you want to just share that, I can look at it and see if it's different or not.
Actually, I haven't done that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Let me see.
Yeah, the data I have is from the HTTP database, which they have already finished the ICA.
Gotcha. Okay, it looks like it's ICA Aroma in DeepAbbey. So you would follow, so instead of, you know how I showed you the first script to run ICA Aroma, DeepAbbey does that for you. And then you should still get that same output with them classifying the data for you. And then let me just show you, because sometimes if it does a good job, then you don't have to classify it. So let me show you the file that you would want to use next if they did a good job. Okay, that's fine. Okay, let me just go back. Okay, so this is what it should look like for after depupy. You should get the melodic.ica still, and then yeah, that should be, so that's the one that is like the unclassified one, and then you should get this one that is like their denoised version. So if they did a good job, you know, you can look here at like what they classified, and you go through it, double check, like, okay, did Aroma actually do a good job at classifying it for me? Then you're gonna just use this file here, the func_data, this one, for your next step. So usually, at least in for us, what we do for dynamic analyses, we'll use the ICA Aroma or ICA file before doing further pre-processing steps, or you use it in your analysis, whatever you do. So that's the case if it does a good job. Usually it doesn't. So in that case, you would want to edit this one or look at this one here, and you would run the fsl-reg_filt command on the melodic ic.nai.gz file. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Well, I recommend reading the paper when you guys do get to it. Usually it's the case where you have to hand classify it, just because what we've noticed is that usually it's not perfect. I think Jason said that FSL fix is pretty good. So then you'd only train or classify a couple of the subjects, and then it trains a classifier to do that for you. And usually that does a better job than when you run ICA Aroma. So that's another option, but you might have to give like a tutorial on that later because that's like a different thing. Yeah, so if there aren't any other questions, I think that goes over everything. And yeah, thanks you guys for watching. Did you have any other questions, Yunkai, or?
Not for now. Not for now. Maybe later.
Okay, yeah. Feel free to email me, and I'll send you guys those scripts or put it in your folders, or I guess Celia's folder. But yeah, other than that, yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, especially if you come across any tricky ones. You can always ask me to take a double look at it.
Right. Thank you so much for today's lecture.
Yeah, of course. All right, I'll see you guys later.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.